What should we do when the need is greater than our resources? I experience this as stress when the to-do list is longer than the time available to get it done, when the needed knowledge is not available and we need to make a decision, or when the skill, the ability is not sufficient for the work that I'm called to do, and I experience stress. My name is John Bell, pastor of Crossway Multinational Church, and I want to tell you a little bit of the story of our journey. We started about 12 years ago this summer, and I want to share a little bit from the first sermon I preached in our living room when we first met. And it turns out to be a story that I have had to learn over and over again, and I'm still just learning it. In John 6, we read the story of the feeding of 5,000 men, plus women and children. So maybe 20,000 people, we don't know how many. We read this in John 6, verses 5 and 6. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. What a fascinating intro to the story. So many people. And Jesus asked Philip, so how about we buy bread? And we're told that he asked this to test him. And I think it's not exactly like a final exam where we say, did Philip understand things well enough yet? Did he understand yet? I think there's an element to that. But I also think he wanted to show Philip and all the disciples that, humanly speaking, there was no reasonable way to feed this crowd. Half a year's wages was way beyond what they could do, and would it be wise to do that for one meal, one afternoon on a hillside? He wanted to confirm that there just wasn't a human way for this to make sense, to work out. And then I think Jesus wanted to model a good way forward, because he already had in mind what he was going to do. And I'm fascinated by what he was going to do. So we jump down to John 6, verse 10. Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. I'm fascinated by what Jesus did. The first thing he did is he said, "Disciples, have the people sit down. Have them get ready." And I expect the disciples were pretty nervous for what does that imply and how will this work out? But he said, prepare for what God is going to do. And then Jesus took the loaves. He took the bread, the 5 small loaves of bread that they had for this 20,000 people. Then he gave thanks. Surprisingly, he said, "God, thank you for this tiny bit of food." Not what would have gone through my mind. And then he distributed to all those who were seated there. He distributed what little they had, and the great surprise is as much as they wanted. That by a miracle, God provided, and they had enough, more than enough. And it says then that Jesus did the same with the fish. So he repeated this. Have the people sit down. He took the loaves, he gave thanks, and then he put it to use. And then we read in the rest of this passage what happened when they had all had enough to eat. He said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. And so in the great surprise, not only did they have enough, there was leftover food they had to go gather. God provided. So when the need is too great, the first lesson that I have to learn is that our God is greater still. What do we do when we have the reality that the need is too big for us, and yet we have a God who is greater than that need? What should we do? And I think Jesus did give a good model of what we should do. One is prepare for God to work. Anticipate that he will be present. He will do what he calls us to do. So prepare for God to work. He said, have the people sit down, be ready to receive food. And then he says, gather what you have. Find what resource you have, as small as it is, 5 tiny loaves of bread and a few fish for perhaps 20,000 people was nowhere near enough. But that wasn't the issue. He said, gather what you have, and then give thanks to God for what we have. Say, God, thank you for what you have given, for the task that you've called us to. And in thanking God, it is saying, and so God, help us apply what we have to the need we have, and so then to use it. And I think this is such a good model. I think this is what Jesus meant when he said he already knew what he was going to do. He was going to prepare for God to work. He was going to gather what he had, as little as it was, give thanks to God for it, and then to break it and hand it out, believing that God himself, who is greater still, would do the miracle. This is a lesson I have to keep learning, and I've not learned it well, and yet I've seen how God works. One of our stories as a church is when we had a pastoral intern for 2 years, and what a privilege it was, what a great opportunity it was, and yet partway in, it was this realization that we don't have the needed resources for the work that needs to be done. We don't have enough. And so what do? Well, we trust God. So we take the journey, we gather what we have, and give thanks to God for it, asking him to help with what he calls us to do and put it into good practice. And I still can't explain how it is that it worked out with the minimal resources that we had, and our pastoral intern who lived on very little, but it amazingly worked out. God provided. I am still learning this in terms of time. And so I have, and a few times, been able to say, God, I'm going to prepare for the work you have. Here's the time I have available. And I thank you for it. Thank you for giving me what I need, for what you call me to do. And then trusting his blessing, put it into practice. And I've seen how God has worked in that. I think this is true for so many areas of life where we have resources that we lack and a sense of a call that's bigger than that. And to turn to God, prepare for his work, gather what we have, thank him for it, then break it and put it into practice. The key thing I realize that I do is I tend to emphasize what I lack. I say, here's what more I need that God hasn't given. What Jesus chose to do was to acknowledge what God had given, to seek the blessing of God for that need and put it into practice. And I'm convinced as we do that, we will see that our God is greater than all the resources we think that we lack, that we need. When the need is too great, our God is greater still. So let's thank him for what we have, put it into practice, and trust his presence and his work.